Hey guys, Malthus here once again, and quickly want to apologize for voice or whatever. I am a bit sick at the moment and not quite myself, but either way, gonna make a video for the Ice Spear Totem character. So I benched the Champion Steel Skills character because did about all I wanted to do with it and really needed to start my progress on maps again, and I definitely want to try out lots of the new shit. That has been given to us in Betrayal, and Ice Spear Totems, the other starter type situation I was not too sure about when giving it out in the video, is something I really wanted to try. So here we are, this is Ice Spear Totems. Currently on screen you can see I have 5 totems, and each totem can shoot up to 9 projectiles worth of Ice Spear, and it seems to farm pretty fucking hard. So it's pretty well made for these Betrayal type safe houses, the layouts are really good, and it is actually pretty heavily dependent on layout, the clear speed and the enjoyment of the Ice Spear Totems in general. With certain layouts that have pretty big open spaces, you're going to enjoy your Ice Spear Totems a lot. The more closed off, tighter, linear sort of stuff, like let's say a Toxic Sewers, which is typically a really good map for characters, it's not so great for this one. You do have to place your totems, you do have to wait for the Ice Spear to then activate and actually hit the target, and it does feel just a little clumsy. But so far, the single target of this skill and this build is what has been actually truly impressive, because quite often you will be comparing this to Arc Totems, and people will ask me, Arc Totems or this. It's pretty fucking impossible to beat Arc Totems on clear and efficiency. It's just not going to happen. But you can have enough fun with this and still have decent enough clear that it doesn't feel terrible, because our single target is fairly insane. So currently I have something like 300,000 or 400,000 single target damage against endgame bosses per totem if all of the projectiles connect. Now, that's not guaranteed to happen, but in a lot of cases it will, and I'm not sure if that's much better than Arc Totems at the moment, but it is certainly very good. So I think for endgame boss single target damage, it's going to be doing pretty good work, and you can see that there's just a shitload of projectiles going through, and I'll show you what the sound of that is in just a second when I'm going over the character, because that is fairly important. It does make a lot of noise, and if you're really not enjoying that, then you probably won't enjoy the build. Kinda has this machine gun-like effect to it, and then when you put on the microtransaction, it reverts it back to the old Ice Spear effect, and it sounds more like a plasma gun, something like that. So this is another example of a map that you're probably not loving so much, because it is a lot of closed rooms and doors and corners and stuff, and it's not too bad. I don't really feel terrible playing this sort of thing, but it's not optimal by any means. So far though, the Betrayal content has been taken on pretty well with Ice Spear Totems. Place your totems, run around, and well, things die. It works pretty well. Probably going to be less efficient than Arc Totems once again, but that doesn't worry me too much. And the other big question is Scion versus Hierophant. So I recommended Scion, primarily because it's just a bit different to Hierophant, since we always do play those for totem builds at the moment, but also because the other half of the Scion Ascendancy I got was Deadeye, and I think that does synergize well with Ice Spear Totems. So Deadeye gives you 2 additional chances to pierce enemies, and then also an additional projectile. So at this point, that's not necessarily that good, since I do already have some pierce on my gear, and as well as that, I do have 8 projectiles, so a 9th, not the biggest deal, but it is still pretty decent, considering it gives you a lot of passive points. You still get the important thing from the Hierophant side of things, which is an additional totem, so it is just a bit different, and you can definitely build around the Hierophant instead, and that probably means you'll be a lot more flexible for going Arc Totems if you really want, because for the most part, most of these totem builds are going to be built almost identical to each other. It's matter of your links and how you set up your gear, so you can very easily just swap in one other gem and start playing a different skill altogether, which one of the things I've been doing was trying out Winter Orb. You do have to spec a little bit more for that one, because as Ice Spear, you basically aren't specking almost any crit, since the second phase of the Ice Spear is going to be giving you a whole bunch more crit, so you're very light on crit, meaning if you swap to another spell, then you will have a pretty reduced amount of crit on that other spell, since no other spell is going to give you this ridiculous amount of crit. So as you can see, single target, pretty ridiculous, a lot of spears going out, and it is rather fun against single target encounters. So I do like to make these characters pretty early on into the league so I can figure out the gear and the necessities of the character, because just the theory crafted proposed version often isn't exactly what we're going to be dealing with in the end, and that's what I'm going to show you right now. So the character is currently level 85, called They Don't Snow, the Scion. Passive tree hasn't really changed much from the proposed passive tree. I think I may have grabbed an extra mana node over here for reduction as well, an extra totem node for resists. Otherwise, I've also just not gone through here and gotten this power charge. The rest of it, I think, is roughly the same, and nothing really needs to be too altered there. However, for gear, I did recommend a staff, a power charge on crit staff, and that is still probably the best end game, but for playing with a budget, because most of us probably are going to be fairly poor at this point of Betrayal, it's a lot better off just grabbing a couple of wands that have profane, because they got plenty of cast speed. So cast speed here, and then it's got cast speed, bit of crit multi, bit of spell damage. Likewise with this one, these are each worth like 1 to 2 C, so my combination of wands is like less than 5 chaos, and then you just run a tabula, because getting a 6 link early on is pretty goddamn tough, and this tabula has +2 socketed projectile gems, so ultimately that gives me another 2 levels worth of damage to Ice Spear. And this thing in total cost me 27 chaos. So by the power combined of my chest and 2 wands, I'm now running 30 C worth of items there. The rest of the gear is also pretty budget. There's actually nothing too special going on. I think my amulet has cast speed, crit multi, something like 5 C. The ring, obviously worthless. An aspect of the spider ring is something that I didn't know would be available, but is highly recommended at this point. This thing's worth like, yeah, 10 C or some shit. Then just a nothing belt, a nothing pair of boots, a nothing pair of gloves. And the helm enchant here isn't really too crucial, and what it does is, as you can see, Ice Spear does go into 2 different phases. So you start out with 1, and then eventually it turns into the second phase, which is slightly better. That just means it activates a little quicker, which is almost unnoticeable. So currently you'll see it activates at roughly the pile of gold over here. If you have this on, it activates like a few feet before the pile of gold, so barely worth taking. I paid like 30 chaos for that helm enchant, wasn't really worth it, but the important thing is that you can get a suffix onto your helm and gloves that projectiles pierce an additional target. So both of those, I'm going to put it on these as well. When you have both of those, you then have 4 pierce projectile from both the Scion over here, which does 2, and then this and this. You'll have 4 projectile pierce. It's pretty good quality of life for clearing. Now, something else I never anticipated, or could not have, is the fact that Stormbrand is basically a superior Orb of Storms at this point for utility. So before you go into a fight, or while you're fighting a pack of enemies, you drop a Stormbrand, and they're going to go around bouncing between enemies and giving you your power charges and also your curse on hit. So it's completely replaced Orb of Storms in my setup, and I now have Stormbrand attached to power charge on crit, gives very efficient power charges, then Frostbite and curse on hit. So Stormbrand is just doing great work, and then you can also have Arcane Surge attached to that if you're not spec'd into things like Hierophant. For general spellcasters, I think Arcane Surge power charge on crit will probably be attached to your Stormbrands from now on, so it's very good utility there. Besides that, we are pretty much the same as what the guide would have indicated at the start. So you're running Ice Spear, attached to Spell Totem, greater multiple projectiles, multiple totems, hypothermia, and controlled destruction. Now hypothermia and cold pen, it'll depend on how much cold penetration you have as to which one is better. Currently I'm running hypothermia, though you can just, at the point that I'm at, drop GMP altogether and start running cold pen, so that you only have 5 projectiles, but they hit a lot harder. So it'll look something like that, as opposed to something like that. So for the most part, I do actually run GMP all of the time, though it is a bit iffy against some encounters where you're just shooting projectiles everywhere and they're not hitting as hard. So play around with that yourself and see how you feel. Now the next thing we should talk about is multiple totems support. I think it's worth it. In most cases, it seems like it is worth getting 2 totems summoned at a single time, and as well as that, you can then get up to 5 totems instead of up to 3 maximum, and people ask if it's worth it for arc totems. I think it should be as well, but my answer, as always, is play around with it yourself and see if you like it. Seems like multiple totems is worth doing though, in my opinion. Now the rest of the build is actually pretty straightforward. I'm running a Clarity. Like I mentioned, my other reservation is Aspect of the Spider. I think it's very worth doing because Aspect of the Spider reduces movement speed of everything nearby and also stacks up the web effect on the enemy up to 15% increased damage taken on those enemies. And for this type of cold spellcaster build, you're not really going to get this type of damage from anywhere else, and it doesn't reserve much, so we are still very heavy on the mind over matter mana unreservation. Aside from that, we have Flame Dash with faster casting attached, and a Frost Bomb attached to Righteous Fire, Vile Righteous Fire, just for boss encounters, and then increased duration. So you place the Frost Bomb underneath enemies, and it gives them minus cold resist, so that's usually worth doing as well. Now, I did also mention this ring for your setup. So you wear this ring, you put your Vile Lightning Trap and Lightning Trap in there, and that means that whenever you hit anything with your Lightning Trap or Vile Lightning Trap, the enemies will have minus 50 to cold resist because you are getting this node over here. So make sure you have no additional cold damage to your gear whatsoever. So you see this ring, this wand has additional chaos damage. Do not have any additional cold damage on your wands, rings, Herald of Ice, whatever it is, because then you will deal additional cold damage on your lightning trap, and that means that you'll also give them a bonus cold resist. So be careful of that if you're going to use this ring. For the most part, it hasn't even felt necessary. It's a big overkill of damage against some boss encounters when I can actually throw some traps at them, something like this, before a certain boss encounter. It'll then give a minus 50 lightning res, cold res, but basically that's almost never necessary at this point. So, you know, if you really don't want to deal with this thing, you don't have to. It's just going to be for min-maxing your damage overall. Now, I've grabbed a low-level Ice Spear, just a level 1, so that you can see what this sounds like while playing with it. I think it sounds pretty satisfying and chunky and shattery with no MTX whatsoever. Okay, apparently I'm still absolutely destroying things with a level 1 in Act 9, so my bad. So I kind of like that one. I kind of like the look as well, but I do appreciate the current MTX out there. It's supposed to be Swordfish, but it just gives us the old microtransaction or the old look, and it sounds a bit lasery when it shoots a lot of times anyway. So bear in mind, that's what you're going to be listening to quite a lot when you play this type of build. If you don't really like that, then that's definitely something to take into consideration. Now lastly, before I move on, all I wanted to say was that leveling this is a little bit of a bitch because you won't have a lot of the good stuff early on. So to level, I just went straight through there and beelined all the way even through here, through these nodes, and grabbed Ancestral Bond. And around that time is when I could start becoming totems, but until that point, I was leveling with Stormbrand. So you can just use Stormbrand, attach it to a couple of damage supports, and it's actually pretty good to carry you for leveling up until you start being totems. By the time I was 38 and got multiple totem support and Ancestral Bond, that's when I went into the totem lifestyle and started playing Ice Spear totems. However, at that point, Arc totems probably be a lot stronger. You do really kind of need your good things to happen before you can actually get Ice Spear totems rolling, and that is going to be this Rain of Splinters. That's going to be some of these totem nodes for placement speed. That's going to be the Ascendancies. So you get this in Cruel, you get this in Merciless. Around that time is when Ice Spear totems kind of start to take off and feel pretty good. Up until then, maybe just run Stormbrand, maybe just run Arc totems. Really up to you. Maybe the entire Ice Spear totem playstyle isn't really for you, or totems in general aren't for you. But I've been running Ice Spear totems here, and the single target I think is really enjoyable. The absolute clusterfuck is pretty enjoyable, and it's a bit different from the usual arc totems. Lastly, I'll leave you with the path of building. So this is what we're looking at, about 330,000 damage per totem for all forms of the second projectile. Form all projectiles to hit. It looks something like that. If you factor in Malachi's Artifice Ring, you then get like another 150k damage. Vile Righteous Fire, like another 150k. So it can get a lot bigger than that, but it's a bit more situational. That's roughly what it looks like so far, guys. That's Ice Spear Totems. Hopefully in the next few days I have a bit more endgame for this character, because I'm still progressing my Atlas pretty slowly personally. But hope you guys are having a great time in Betrayal. Thank you very much for watching the video, and see you next time.